Are you ready to learn? Because my super experienced guests are ready to share some really valuable information. Make sure and listen all the way to the end to get help and support. So let's start with the best audio experience.
Hello guys, welcome to our show. Today we discuss about unique selling proposition. I love this topic because today it's hard to overcome your competitors if you have your own advantages. So I'm so excited to discuss this topic with Ryland Goldstein. How are you?
I'm doing great. It's a lovely day. We're in the holiday season, so you can never complain about anything.
Nice. I think, if you set up the positive mindset, you don't need to complain at any day. It doesn't matter. It's Monday, not holiday season. Just love what you do and do what you love. For example, I remember on school, I hated Monday. And right now I can see the same issue with my son. He hates Monday. He told me, no way. I don't want to go to school. It's better to play soccer. It's better to spend time with something else. But so it's our education. But in adult life, when you find something that related to your hobbies, so you can go ahead. It doesn't matter what kind of day you have. Rilla, before we start, just tell more about yourself, experience, background, and why you decided to share with us about unique selling proposition.
So my background, it's pretty involved. So I started out in a very different area of things, at least to some degree, than I ended up in. And so, when I was in my teens, I got into writing code. Specifically was, into writing code for either building like a game or a game engine. And so I very quickly was spending almost all my time, up until like when I was like 20 or 21, just writing code pretty much all day, every day. And so that's what I was doing. I got a lot of hands-on experience. I was going to University of Washington for computer science. And because of the amount of time I'd already spent coding, I had a professor there that was doing research who asked me to come and be one of his research students. And so I started doing research under that professor. And so then, long story short, he ended up hiring me out of University of Washington to join a startup that he had just joined. And then through a series of quite unfortunate events, he ended up actually leaving that company almost immediately. And so I actually became sort of like the manager and the leader of the team that he had actually started and I was originally on. And that was actually like my first job, out of college was being like an engineering leader and manager for this team based on the campus of University of Washington, believe it or not. And so that's what I was doing for a while. That was like an Israeli company. That was building a competitor to like Apache Spark, so like big data, machine learning stuff. And so then, just through the normal reasons that people get frustrated with companies, I ended up getting frustrated with that company. And so I ended up leaving. And actually, two of the people who had started that company, we had become friends and they had said, okay, we're thinking about starting our own thing now. And so, I actually then joined them and we decided, okay, we're going to start this company. And we ended up, deciding to do that. And so at the time, AWS had just come out with this AWS Lambda concept, which is like sort of the next generation. We saw it as the evolution of, kind of computing and the way that people are going to build things on, the cloud and build applications and build products. And so we decided that, like all engineers do, that's awesome, but we're going to be able to one up it. Like we can build a better version. And so we decided we're going to start this company, around this concept of building a competitor to this product that AWS had just recently released. And so I actually moved to Israel at this point because the other two founders were Israeli. And so like we needed to bootstrap the company. We didn't have any funding. We didn't have any of that stuff. And so I actually moved to Israel to sort of help bootstrap the company and, generate some actual like money from investors, which we ended up doing almost immediately. And so then, myself and these two other guys, we ended up, starting to build out this company that was now funded to build a competitor to Lambda. And so, we were doing that for quite a few years. I was in like various leadership roles, like, either leading like the architecture on the actual design of the distributed system and all the application logic. And then, eventually even getting into a more like, user-facing role where we were actually trying to get people to, pay us money and start using the product. And so the best way to put it is that we didn't really do our due diligence, and we didn't really do a good job of like ensuring that the thing that we were building had a unique selling point, a unique selling proposition at all. And so when we tried to eventually bring it to market after 2 years of R&D, which was, really bad choice to invest that much, kind of and front load it, we realized that there was no market for this thing. And so we effectively, we still had enough money to operate as a business and like, keep moving forward. But we had no real path to like turning the thing that we had spent all our time on into money. And so at that point, I'd become kind of disheartened. I was like, I'm obviously good enough at writing code that I could make a pretty complex thing happen. But, I wrote all this code for this complex thing and it's useless. Like literally, it's never going to make any of us money. It's not going to be, important for the business. And so like, really, what was the point of me spending all that time writing code? And so that's where I sort of had this change of heart and this, shift in my mindset of like, okay, well, maybe there's other stuff that is actually more important for the business's success, at least in the way that I can influence it outside of just writing the code. And so that's when I got into the product side of things and like, let's say like growth marketing, growth hacking side of things. And so I went and did a bunch of research. I said, okay, look, there's this completely different product that we could probably leverage some of what we already built for. It's a completely different market. It's a completely different thing. But it's not like a, complete waste, everything we've done. And I think that, we could go and get product market fit here. It's much smaller than what we originally expected in terms of like, the available market, but I think it's the right thing. And so I pitched that to the company. We ended up going forward with that. And I led that effort until we brought it to market at like the beginning of 2020. And so at that point, I just decided like I'd been with those guys for a long time. I just needed a break. And so I told them, I'm going to leave. And then very, very coincidentally, unfortunately, a month after I left, they actually ended up getting approached by Twitter, and Twitter was like, well, now that's a question of whether it's a good thing. But, up until like, 6 months ago, it was a pretty good outcome. Twitter ended up acquiring that company. And so, all of those people went and worked at Twitter for a while, and now they're, doing their own stuff. So that's where I was up until this recent opportunity that I joined. And so I actually wasn't planning on even working at that point. Like I had, saved up a good amount of money, and I was writing for, Stack Overflow and a bunch of other well-known sites at that point, because I'd sort of built my own personal following, in like the technical writing space. And so I was just planning on figuring out what I wanted to do with, the rest of my career and everything. And then there was this virus that people started talking about early in 2020 called COVID. And that was very unfortunately right when I chose to leave my other job. And so, all of a sudden, like I'm figuring out that there's this huge global pandemic and I probably need to like find a new place to work. And, don't want to like figure out my life right at this point, because it's probably not the best time to be doing that. And so very like, serendipity, I guess is the best way to put it. The only investor for Temporal, which is where I work now at the time, approached me because they'd seen some of my writing online, some of the blogging that I had done, and basically cold called me and said, hey, you should be doing product work for this company. And so that's when I met, the founders of Temporal. It was like 5 or 4 people at the time when I started interviewing them. There was like a seed round of funding. There was no like product even that people could like. We had an open source product that was very, very like mature, but it wasn't like production ready yet because we had left Uber and kind of forked it. And so there was basically nothing there at that time. And so I was still like, and I think it's a really good example of a unique selling proposition, but we can get to that in a bit. But I did like a lot of due diligence, during my interview process, and I was very convinced that this thing is like the fundamental solution to a lot of people's problems. And so that's when I ended up joining Temporal. And so, at Temporal, things have been pretty interesting for me, because for like the first year, around a year and a half, I was responsible for like running the business of Temporal. So effectively everything but engineering, but even some engineering teams were kind of, under me. And so I was responsible for sort of defining like our initial, non-commercial launch, because we're an open source technology. And so we need to figure out what is the first thing we're going to release, even just to people who aren't going to pay us money. And then I was the one who kind of led the definition of our commercial offering, like our initial business model, our go-to-market strategy. So like all the moving pieces there, actually like developing and kind of, productizing the thing that we'd already built with this technology, but, actually making it available on the cloud. And then I even actually was the one who did like all the marketing and outreach and like, solution architecture and sales. And like I landed our first 15 customers myself, actually. So I was even doing like say enterprise level sales last year for a lot of the year. And so that's what I was doing. We got into a really good place. Like we were able to, be commercially successful enough last year that we raised a really, really good Series B at like $1.5 billion valuation. And so at that point, like I felt like I'd put us in a good enough place on the sales side. That's not my expertise. I'd never done it before Temporal. And so we started hiring like a really, first-class sales team. And so now kind of what's happened is I've shifted back to what I originally joined Temporal for. And I'm responsible for defining like the roadmap and sort of the prioritizations and the features for our core technology. But I also still, just from, being early in play, I manage like other functions in the company, like design and developer relations as well. So kind of a long answer to your question, but hopefully that's helpful.
I love your experience. You tried many things, and for me, failing only brings new experience and nothing else. So I made bad choices as well in my life. I tried to launch startups, and I failed with them because, that's life, So what we can do? We don't know. We can't predict the future. So sometimes we can listen to intuition or our heart. So I did it, but that's okay. I found something that works for me, and many great entrepreneurs, including Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg, failed with some startups. That's okay. I think, that's great. But you get, you get a real good experience, even working with these projects that you named. So, and it helps you today. I love that you mentioned about priorities. You told that right now you can prioritize things. I think priorities are, it's important to set up priorities because when you know your unique selling proposition, you can get much higher results. Can you tell your methods how to choose priorities? Because we can't do anything. For example, I usually do like 1-2 important tasks and can skip or delegate the rest. If I can't delegate, so I can skip because I know I only have 2 hands, some experience. Tell your methods how to prioritize things and choose something that will provide results.
Yeah, it's a great question, and the answer depends on sort of the level of where it's being asked. I will say that I completely agree about the failures. Like I would say that if there's anything that I think contributes more to why I'm so successful now, it's the amount of opportunity I've had to fail, in such a short period of time. Like I've failed so many things, and like that can be a bad thing. Really, what makes it a good thing is if you learn from your failures. It's almost always a positive thing. But if you don't learn from them, that's when you get in trouble, right? So. So what I would say is that for prioritization, there's a really easy answer, and then there's a much more involved answer. From like the theoretical point of view, right? It's really straightforward, which is you need to understand what is actually going to move the needle the most for whatever entity or business. It doesn't really matter if you're in a business or you're an individual. Whatever your objective is, right? You need to have some objective, like some fundamental objective, and usually it's important that the objective is not something that can just be accomplished in like a day. Like you want to have something that's like sort of a vision, right? Where like that even if you spent all of your time for the next month, it still isn't going to be done because like it needs to be bigger than that. It needs to be something you're driving towards. And so then it just becomes a question of like within the context of this long-term goal that you have, like what are the series of steps that I can take to get me there the fastest, right? And I think that the part where it does become a little bit more tricky is that we live in like a real world, right? We're not living in like a idealistic bubble where we can just like write down these really idealistic plans and have them all play out. And so in the context of a business, the way that sort of like manifests is that you might decide that like our goal for Temporal is that every developer in the world uses Temporal in 10 years, and like I love that vision. It's a great vision, but the reality is that like we have to be a business that like can sustain itself and like keep the lights on and make money in that like progress that we have to getting 10 years from now to where we want to be. And like that also might mean that we need to make a bunch of short-term choices which like almost seem incongruent or like disconnected from that longer term thing, but the reason we need to do it is because it's necessary to keep us alive and functioning to the point where we can actually get to that 10-year thing, right? And so I think when you're approaching priorities, that's sort of the extra layer of dimensionality that you have to be aware of, is that it's not just like what is the optimal path to get to this end goal, but like what are the concessions and what are the compromises that I have to make along the way to ensure that I'll even be able to reach that end goal when I want to get there, right? And so I think that's sort of like the foundation to any sort of prioritization choices that you have to make, is identify what your sort of end goal or vision are, and then understand like what you can afford to tolerate in terms of like short-term losses and short-term like inability to do what you actually need to do long-term in order to get to that long-term goal, right? And so I think kind of a very concrete example is that many times when you're like a seed stage startup, you're an early stage company, and you get money from a VC. If the VC believes that your market has a huge potential, like the TAM of the market is really, really large, they'll tell you like, hey, don't think about making money, like ignore revenue, just pretend it doesn't exist, like maximize for growth, right? And because basically what that VC is doing is they're making a prioritization choice, which is like they believe the long-term return on investment of that business, if like, they can just be heads down and only focus on growing the market, it will end up being a much more bigger net win for them. And they're willing to pay off because they have the capital, literally they have the money to spend to pay off the short-term cost of that business being underwater and not actually making money, and like, basically paying to get more users because the long-term trade-off is worth it, right? And so like VCs are in the unique position where they get to plan a longer timeline than most people. Like, when I'm making decisions for Temporal, I unfortunately can't be like, yeah, we'll just waste $5 million for the next year or whatever, right? Because we work in the business and we're not VCs. So I think that, I could definitely go into more like, if you ask me, for example, how I prioritize individual work, the engineers who, work with me, like do, I could answer that question as well, but not sure if that's as interesting as the other stuff.
Yeah. Love your reply. Okay, let's talk about Temporal. You mentioned a few times about your company, this company. So, I opened your LinkedIn profile and can see I like your mantra: build invincible apps. So, can you tell more about that? What kind of unique selling proposition Temporal has compared to other products that we have online? Because many companies can provide the same services to build apps, but why your apps are invincible? So why you're better than the whole market, for example?
Yeah. So one thing I'll tell you is that, and it's even a problem for us when we're trying to sell to a very technical audience, but we're a very, very deeply technical product. So I'm going to try to stay at sort of a higher level of abstraction for what I explained to you. And I'll explain it in the way where how did I decide that I was so confident that I should join Temporal and that, this is the right, I feel like that's sort of the real answer to the question. And like my baseline sort of answer here is that, because I built this product at my last company that, I was one of the people who started, and this product was so useless. Like we really, really didn't serve any person that we thought we were going to be, building it for. And so I had this like very deep like trauma coming into Temporal of like, I'm never going to build something or work on something that I don't know for a fact people want. Like if I don't know that going in, like it's just not worth my time. And like if there's one advice I could give to everyone who's like, thinking about starting a company or building a product, it's like, if you don't know for a fact that people are like dying in the street because they don't have whatever you think you're going to build, like don't build it. There's a million things you can build that people are actually dying without. Like don't waste your time trying to build something that's not, it's going to be a bad time, trust me. So yeah, don't do that.
Yeah. I love it. But I remember another quote. For example, if you build something that customers love from the first launch, that means you launched too late, this product. Okay, for example, we can build high expectations that anyone or our customers, perfect customers, will love our products, but it takes time, to launch the first version, the second, to update all these versions. So, can you tell about patience? Because it takes time, to write code, to create something meaningful, interesting. Of course, the final goal to provide something much better than competitors have, that customers will love and can't live without that. But it takes time, with patience, with updating. So provide insights about patience, how to set up the right expectations of building some products.
Yeah, so I have the Temporal itself is a great example of this, but it might be a bit discouraging for people. So unfortunately, sorry for that in advance. But the story of Temporal and how it came to be as a technology is actually like the most like true story of patience that could have ever existed. So our founders, Max and Samar, they actually met at AWS working at Amazon in 2010, 10, I think, maybe even before that. And they were both part of a team for this project that Max was basically the one who had sort of incepted and led, which is called Simple Workflow. And like in most ways, Simple Workflow is the original version of like temporal as a technology. Like it's the basis of really the most innovative thing in temporal. Max figured that out when he was working on Simple. He came up with this idea and he put it in this product that he built for Amazon. And like within Amazon, even to this day, that is a very successful technology. Like I think it's one of the most dependent on services that they use inside of AWS. Now, at some point, even when, Max and Samar were still working there back in like, the 2010 era, they were approached by, executives at Amazon and AWS and were told, hey, we would love to launch this as a commercial service, like, actually put it out for people to use. And so they did. And Max and Samar were the ones who were, leading the launch of this service. It flopped. Basically, it was not popular at all. It was like to this day, it's almost never used by people outside of Amazon. And so, this core technology, this innovation, it basically was like a massive and tremendous failure. And so, at that point, Max and Samar went their separate ways. They left Amazon. They went and worked at their own companies. So at this point, Samar goes and he works at Microsoft at Azure. And he really still believes, they both still really believe independently that this idea they had at Amazon was the thing, and that they don't know why it didn't work out, but it didn't work out. And so Samar then at Microsoft, he gets like the buy-in where he's like, I'm going to build like I'm going to try to take a stab at this, like working at Microsoft. And so he builds another version of this thing, basically for the Microsoft ecosystem. And eventually it becomes very popular in Microsoft. And so they come and approach Samar and they're like, hey, we want to launch this as a service. And so he's like, sure. And so they ended up launching it. And it's still to this day, you can go and use it. It's called Durable Functions. It's actually like quite a large product. But it never took off. It was never popular. And so like, you would think that, most normal people, they'd be like, well, I'm done. Like, fuck that. I'm never going to do that again. Right. But no. So then by coincidence, complete coincidence, Max and Samar ended up both joining Uber around 2000, I think 17 or 2018, and just ended up working together again. What not planned. They weren't communicating anything like that. And what do you know? But they sit together and they're like, what should we do right now? And they're like, we should try building this thing again. And so they now have taken their third stab at it, which is this project called Cadence. They thought a lot about like, why did these two previous versions fail? Like, why didn't it work out? Right. This is like over 10 years after they sort of first started working on that first version. And they finally realized like, okay, it wasn't open source. Like, there's these very specific things that we think really contribute. So they built this third version, Cadence, for Uber. And they tried to fix all those mistakes. And well, what do you know? Almost immediately blows up in Uber, right? And so that in itself, like that had kind of happened in the previous two, incarnations. But then what started happening is because it's open source and people are leaving Uber occasionally, engineers, they start coming from other companies and being like, hey, I use this thing at Uber. It's open source. Like, why can't we use it at, Airbnb? Why can't we use it at X company? Why can't we? And so then all of a sudden you had all of this, adoption coming not just from people in Uber, but from the outside community. And it was very, very clear at that point, okay, we have something that's bigger than, just a product that's interesting for like Amazon or Microsoft. This is actually like an innovation in technology that everyone else wants to buy into. And so that was really when they were confident enough to break out of, Uber and actually start Temporal, which is effectively just this Cadence project that we forked and now we've made a lot of improvements to. But that was over 10 years, and it took them over 10 years before they really were, kind of proven out on this belief that they had, which obviously they were right about, because now it's very clear that, so many people love what they built and wouldn't live without it. But it took a very long time to get there.
Yeah, I agree. 10 years. Yeah, it's a decade. But if you have patience, perseverance, if you love what you do, so anything is possible. Once I listened to your podcast, I don't remember the name, but one of billionaires, the close friend of Jeff Bezos, and he told on this podcast that he spent 15 years without even one sales. 15 years he spent time, and Jeff Bezos called him crazy because 15 years without sales, but he believed that anything is possible. He could grow his product, and today it's a big company, plus 50 countries, offices, many countries, but sorry that I forget his name, but 15 years without sales, just believe that it's possible. So yeah, it takes time. I know about that. Okay. I'm interested about your sales background. You mentioned that you help with sales. Right now you have sales team, but what I like in your story, I use the same approach. For example, if I wanna hire someone else, if I wanna cooperate with anyone else, it's better to touch what is it, to understand how it works, so I can spend my time and then I can delegate or control others and hire something much smarter than me, but I can try it. But I open your profile. Temporal has clients: Datadog, Glovo, Indeed, Netflix. You mentioned about Microsoft, about Uber. So tell me, how to reach out such big companies that have their developers, they have their departments, how to tell them that you can provide something better, much better, and give a solid reason, to cooperate with you. Just any tips about that?
Yeah. So, I mean, the answer is really easy, but it's also not that helpful, which is like have a really good product. Honestly, that's like 99% of it. Like, I mean, the real thing that I would say that I learned and that I was providing value for is actually like going from the point where someone has interest and potentially would want to pay you money to actually, especially when you're talking about like, companies like the ones you listed, who are very large enterprises with a lot of process and a lot of sort of gates that you have to get through, like that, getting through all those gates, even if they already want to pay for your product, is not like a trivial exercise. And so that's where I think that, I mostly was providing value. The reality is that, like the technology that Max and Smart had spent, a decade building and was already available through this open source, kind of project. People like at these companies were already bought in on that. They were like, it was a situation where they were already running that stuff inside of the company. And like, I think Snapchat is a good example because that's one that's public, right? And I can talk, and I was very directly responsible for the deal. And so like, when I first started interacting with Snap, like they were already using Temporal. Like it was, it wasn't like I even had to tell them go use our open source thing. Like they had already had a guy in the company who had set up Temporal and was running it, and he understood why it was valuable and why. And he was like, we need to use this more. He was trying to, evangelize inside of Snap. And so I think that, at the end of the day, like that's where I kind of said at the beginning, where if you don't have a product where somebody is like already like dying because they don't have it, don't build it. And like the Temporal is the perfect case of that, where like it was so clear that like people were trying to pay us money. They were like, we didn't have to go and, ask them if they were interested in buying some. They were like, how do I give you money? How do I pay you to not have to deal with these things that come with running your technology? And so then the real issue was like, how do we capture that money? Right. And I think, in some cases it was much more straightforward. Like if I was dealing with a company like, Descript, who's a lovely partner of ours. But, frankly, they're a much smaller company. They're like a startup. And so getting a startup to rely on your product, especially when your product is like a cloud service that really represents like the critical success of their business, because like if Temporal is down, most of our users are down, right? Like their websites are down. And so, to get a startup to trust you to run that stuff, it's relatively easy, right? But like if you want a company like Snap to say, hey, like make this bet on like, one of your core products to run on top of we just started a company, we're like a year old, like you should trust us to run all this stuff. That is a very, very involved process, a very lengthy process that, you have to go through hoops and you have to like establish value and credibility. And I think that's really where the complexity came for me, because people wanted to buy the product even before I showed up at the company.
Yeah, love it. Yeah, I think marketing can't help bad products. Sales can't help bad products. But if you have great products, then marketing and sales will work well. So 100% about that. Let's talk about your background. You mentioned about machine learning, that you started your career with this. So can you tell, how do you use AI in your product development, and any tips for other companies how to use AI today? Because many AI solutions are not great today. Probably they will be great in the future, but right now we can see like AI chatbots or anything else, they don't provide great insights or generating text, pictures, but in the future we'll see. But today it's not. So tell, how do you use, and any tips how to adapt today with AI technology?
Yeah. So I'm a bit of a cynic when it comes to AI. I think that like just to be very frank and temporal, I don't think we use AI for anything. I mean, we may have like a product that we use that they themselves in some way like have AI as part of the service it provides, but we don't directly consume any AI or anything like that. I would say a huge part of this for sure is that we operate at a relatively small scale. We're not like a Fortune 100 company. We're not like like at millions of users or anything, and so. Therefore, it's not as necessary. Like generally, not just AI, but let's say like machine learning really lends itself when you have a lot more data, and we just don't have that data yet, right? So that's one of the reasons. Now, the other thing is that like people often I think the biggest problem with AI is that people assume that it's this much more intelligent and sort of broader thing than it is, when really like when people say AI, especially in the practical use cases and actually providing value in the industry today, many of those use cases, like I wouldn't really argue are AI. They're like machine learning, and even more than that, they're like statistical analysis. Like they're basically just fancy math, right? And so like my guess is that when people say they're doing machine learning or AI, like 80% of the time they're just doing something like a linear regression, which is something that you would learn in like a linear algebra class or statistics. It is absolutely not something that you would think is like a generally artificial intelligence. So that's the first thing I would say, is that most of the practical use cases, at least I've worked with, even when I was working at a company that like literally provided AI for people, like provided machine learning solutions for people, the use cases were far more basic and far less of like actual AI than you would think. Now, I think that things are changing there. And I think one of the most clear, and very recent indications of that is Chat GPT, which, I think that it's being perceived as a bigger advancement than it is, but I would still argue it's like one of the biggest fundamental shifts I've seen in like technology and like innovation in this space, maybe in my lifetime. And so I think what we're seeing there is that, probably within the next 10 to 15 years, you're going to have these very like vertical and very like self-contained use cases for AI where they're able to very much outcompete and beat a human at the same task. And so I don't think like, people have said, they're going to replace develop. I don't think any of that stuff true. I think that, especially when you're at the level of like having to orchestrate a bunch of individual decisions, AI is really bad at doing that sort of higher level thinking. But when you start to say, okay, well, what about things that are like very, very like uninvolved, like where a human barely even needs to be there today, or it just, is so basic and it's so constrained, things like chatbots, for example, but even like, things like, what's another good example? Like search. Like I think that's actually one of the most like obvious places where AI is just gonna win, is like Google and Google search. I think that there's a good chance that we're gonna see that go to way more of something that's like Chat GPT than it's gonna be what we're used to with traditional search engines today. And so I think that those are the places we're gonna see a lot of innovation, like very specific use cases where you can train an AI on like a very like concrete set of data and say, okay, I want you to become the expert at recommending based on this set of inputs, like what is the ideal set of investments for me to make in this market and stuff like that, because I think those are places where you can really train it well and get like a domain specific set of information that lets it have really informed decisions. But the moment that you have to start thinking at that higher level, it's just really we're still really far away from that today. So like an example, just because I've been spending a lot of time with Chat GPT, it's the example I've been telling everyone, is that, my CEO and I were playing around with it and he gave it a physics problem. And like, it was very clearly wrong in the answer that it gave to the physics problem. And so I tried to coach it on how to like solve the physics problem correctly. And so I told it, basically it was trying to solve it without using calculus. And I could tell based on the way that it reached a solution. And so I said, like, can you please use calculus? So it did, but then it used the wrong calculus. And so, then I had to basically tell it, okay, well, you're using calculus, but I really meant that you have to like solve for this sort of thing using this approach. And eventually, it did reach that. But I think that sort of illustrates like how far away we are, which is like, if it's at this very basic level and it has a very concrete understanding, it can absolutely answer the question right. But like, if it needed to think about, oh, this is a problem that involves physics and like it's a continuous problem, so I can't use a discrete solution, it has zero ability to do that today. And so that's really where it's most limited.
Yeah, love it. Yeah. By the way, I think AI tools can beat mediocre specialists, for example, writers who have no experience, who need to improve, but great specialists, they can't. So because great specialists can think that AI can do it today, probably today.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's there's even a company that I'm like lightly familiar with called like Jasper, and I think that's a perfect example where they do like marketing copywriting, but with the AI, and like I think especially for like building SEO and stuff like that, where you're not like necessarily trying to write like the most amazing like literature essay or whatever. Like those type of products are going to become very, very popular.
Yeah. By the way, I think all these companies like Jasper, many others, they usually take data from OpenAI, and if you set up the right commands, so you can get totally the same results. But they set up this commands, so everything what you need to do to choose filters that more user friendly than an OpenAI. But if you have these commands, it's better to play that. Okay.
Yeah.
I have the question about common mistakes. Can you list common mistakes that companies still do by creating apps, and how to find a much better way today?
It's a very broad question.
Yeah, I know.
I would say like is the easiest answer because it's the one that every product manager should give, which is like you don't talk enough to the people who are actually using your product. I think that like when you see companies, especially ones that like historically have like had really awesome products and did really great product development, and they really start to like jump the shark and make weird choices and just do things that are really confusing. In almost all cases that I've seen, it's because they become disconnected from their actual end user, and they become disconnected from the people who are actually going to pay for the product. And I think that's like the number one mistake you can always make. And I think sometimes people they get into this like trap that I've been in before, where they do that at the beginning and they feel very confident and they start making decisions, but then like after some period of time they've sort of like adopted this mentality of like, well, I understood it and I get it, like I don't need to go back and do that again, like I still understand. And like the problem is that like people aren't static, like they change, and so like you can't just assume that because what you learned 3 years ago was right, that it's still going to be right today. And so like that has to be a continuous thing. And like in all honesty, the people that I've seen who have been most successful are the ones who like they don't treat it as like, well, I'm going to go get feedback in 3 months and then I'm going to get in more feedback in a year. It's ones where like every single day, part of their life and part of their job is just getting feedback. And it's a continuous process that they build up and, just make part of like the core of how they do things. So I would say that's like the number one mistake that I see people making, which is obvious, but it's very common.
Love it. Yeah, you remind me, Bill Gates. He shared that negative reviews are the biggest asset to update and innovate products. So if you learn customers' feedback, you know how to improve it. You know how to go ahead. It's the best way. I agree with that.
Yeah, and on that, I would say like another kind of like flavor of that or approach is for companies that are building new products, or even like an existing company that's building something new. People almost always overinvest. Like you can usually prove out whether there's a value and a need for your product before you ever actually build it, right? And so like I think like the people that I know who do this the best, when they have like a new product idea, they pretty much pretend like that's already a thing, and they write up a website that looks like they're already selling it, and then but it's only a landing page. And when you click the button, all that it does is just sign you up on some email list. And then they pretty much have a way of just, getting a sense of how much demand there would be if this was a product. And like, they make the button like, pay me now. So like, it's not just like, oh, I want to use this. It's like, I want this thing enough that I'm willing to pay you money right now when I click this button. And like, obviously they don't take the money because there's no product, but it gives you a real concrete understanding of like, is there a market for this thing? Would people pay me? And you can even then reach out and ask them more questions and follow up and, get more information about the specifics of what they're looking for. And so I would say like, also make sure you don't overinvest in validating whether something's going to work, because you can do it without building anything at all.
Yeah, nice. I have the final question. Let's imagine you started from scratch without any experience, knowledge, skills, anything, just completely from scratch. What will you do to learn more about creating invincible apps?
I mean, honestly, like are you asking me from the point of view of like, I'm a user of Temporal, I'm trying to build them, or like I'm trying to do what I've done with Temporal and sort of build out the product in the company? Which perspective is it?
I'm asking like a customer of Temporal, because let me explain why I'm asking about that. For example, I usually sell SEO services, but I found when my customers know SEO, if they understand how it works, how to improve ranking positions, usually get much higher results. Because if they don't understand why they need to create high quality content, why they need to have good products, so it's hard to get results because we are not magicians, without it's not magic, it's more about a cohesive job, cooperation. So for example, if I'm a customer, tell me how to learn more about your products than to get much higher results.
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of answers for that question. We have various resources now which have gotten a lot. They're still not as great as they could be, but they've gotten a lot better. Since at least since I joined, for sure. And so I think that that's a great place to start. We have a lot of resources, videos. We had a conference earlier this year, and all those videos are online. You can hear from like really amazing companies talking about how they're actually using us. But I think the reality is that the first question is, are your apps invincible right now? And my guess is that for like 99.9% of people, the answer is no, right? And so if that's a problem for you, and the thing is that it is almost always a problem if software is a core part of your business, which it is for like almost every business today. Almost every business is like a software business. Then you pay a price when your software does not work the way that you expect. And not only in the sense that your business could be down, and people can't pay you, and you literally can't generate revenue. But then also the flip side is when your business goes down because the software doesn't work, you have to go then pay your developers and make sure you have developers who can fix that software. And I'll tell you, even if you're willing to pay the developers to go and do that, they don't like doing that. Developers hate having to go and constantly fix software instead of writing new software and building new things. And so I would say that, if that's a problem that you feel resonates with you, I think temporal and, sort of durable execution, which is the, innovation that our product has, is something that you should be very, very interested in. And really, it's just a matter of changing the way that you approach developing that application to sort of use the framework and the patterns that we've defined. And as long as you do that, you don't have to worry about this entire set of problems, and your application becomes invincible just by sort of nature of running on temporal itself. So yeah, I don't think it's very hard because it's a very technically involved product in some ways. And so if you don't already have a problem that temporal solves, usually it's not a good idea to go seek it out. Don't go try to shoehorn something where it doesn't make sense. But if you have any problems with your applications and your software not performing reliably, or having to spend too much of your developers' time maintaining those and paying debt and dealing with failure, then you should definitely look into temporal, because it will just solve that class of problems without you having to waste time on it.
Nice. Love it. Ryland, it's a big pleasure to get on my show, to learn from you. You share a lot of valuable insights. Tell our audience the best way how to reach out to you, how to learn more about you, how to follow you.
Yep. So I think, for me personally, you can feel free to reach out to me on Twitter. My handle is taillogs, but you can also just look up Ryland, and there's not that many people with that name. So it's pretty easy. But I'm also available on LinkedIn. My email is my name. So if you want to ever, shoot me an email, I'm also available pretty much everywhere where Temporal does stuff. So through our Slack and other, community forums and stuff like that. I'm super duper available and always happy to chat about stuff I've been through in my life, or, people who want to learn about, getting into product or technology, or just learning about temporal. All fair game.
Nice. I know why you spend time on all these communities, because you learn customers' feedback that you mentioned on our podcast. So good approach, guys. It's better to follow Ryland on Twitter, on LinkedIn, because you see a lot of valuable insights. I love it. Thanks again for your time. A big pleasure. Thanks guys for listening and watching us. Listen us on Apple, Google, Spotify. You can find all the links in the description below, and see you next time.